lesson is called Proving Lines Parallel. In this lesson, we will have lines cut by a transversal, and depending on whether certain angle pairs are congruent or supplementary, then we can prove that the lines are parallel. And based on that, we can set up equations and solve for angle measures and solve for x based on those properties that make the lines parallel. So our first rule says that if two lines are cut by a transversal and corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So we have each pair of corresponding angles marked here. If those are congruent, the lines are parallel. If those are congruent, then the lines are parallel. That pair and that pair. Now remember, before we would say if the lines are parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. And we can also say the converse. If corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. We also know that if two lines are cut by a transversal and alternate interior angles are congruent, then those lines are parallel. So that pair of alternate interior angles or that pair. It's also true for alternate exterior angles. When alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So we have the red pair and the blue pair. Remember, it used to say if lines are parallel, then alternate exterior angles are congruent. And now we can say the converse also. It's also true for same side interior angles, or consecutive interior angles if you call them that. If those are supplementary, then the lines are parallel. So if that pair is supplementary, or if that pair is supplementary, then the lines are parallel. Remember, these are the ones that are supplementary, not congruent. And it makes sense too, because you have one obtuse and one acute, and an obtuse can't equal an acute. If they are supplementary, then the lines are parallel. The same is true with the same side exterior angles. If those are supplementary, then the lines are also parallel. So all of those rules are true. Just make sure that you know whether the lines when the lines are parallel based on whether the pair is congruent or if it's supplementary. Make sure you know which ones need to be congruent and which ones need to be supplementary. Now the good thing about this is these equations get worked out the same way we did before. You have lines cut by a transversal and a pair of angles. We want to make the lines parallel. And to make the lines parallel, we're going to make an equation. Just like before, we had parallel lines. We knew they were parallel to start, cut by a transversal. What do you know about the angles? And we would set up this same type of equation. So here we have these two angles, 3x and 60. 3x and 60. That's in the top right. That's in the top right. These are corresponding angles. And we know that if corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So let's make these measures equal each other. 3x equals 60. Solve for x. And x has to be 20. So if x is 20, then these lines are parallel. Because if x is 20, then those angles are congruent. And when corresponding angles are congruent, the lines have to be parallel. How about this pair? They're on the same side of the transversal. In between the two lines. These are same side interior angles. They're not congruent. They've got to be supplementary. So these two angles have to add up to 180 because consecutive interior or same side interior, if you call them that, those have to be supplementary. So 2x plus 80 equals 180. They add up to equal 180 because they're supplementary. Subtract 80 from each side. So 2x equals 100. Divide both sides by 2, and x is 50. So if x is 50, then these lines are parallel, because if x is 50, that makes these consecutive interior angles supplementary. How about this pair? They're on opposite sides of the transversal, in between the two lines. These are alternate interior angles. And alternate interior angles need to be congruent to make the lines parallel. Alternate interior angles need to be congruent. So let's make those measures equal each other. X minus 20 equals 70. Add 20 to each side. And x is 90. When x is 90, these angles are congruent, and that makes the lines parallel, because alternate interior angles need to be congruent to make the lines parallel. This last one here, I have another pair of alternate interior angles, and when alternate interior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So let's make these measures equal each other. 3x equals 60. Solve for x. We'll divide both sides by 3, and x is 20. When x is 20, these angle measures are the same, and when alternate interior angles are congruent, the lines are parallel. So when you have questions like this, make sure you determine whether the lines or whether the angles need to be congruent or supplementary. If they're congruent, make them equal each other. If they're supplementary, they need to add up to equal 180. So how do we prove two lines parallel? We can either show that the corresponding angle measures are equal, or show that the alternate interior angle measures are equal. We could show that consecutive interior angle measures are supplementary. That's the same side interior. We could show that the consecutive exterior angles are supplementary. That's the same side exterior. We can also show that the lines are perpendicular to the same line. That's one other way. If the two lines are perpendicular to the same line, then they're parallel. And one more, we can show that alternate exterior angles are congruent. So if alternate interior angles are congruent, alternate exterior angles are congruent, corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. If the consecutive interiors are supplementary or consecutive exteriors are supplementary, then the lines are parallel. And if the lines are perpendicular to the same line, then they're parallel.